All right, Eddie, give me your most rambunctious, your most loud, your most energetic welcome to MMHC that you got.
We're back. Welcome to MMHC. It's time. The time you've been waiting for. I'm hyped. You're hyped. Turn this shit up. That was kind of loud. God. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate it. That was great. I feel like for some reason I really want to watch the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight now. I don't know why that got me in the mood. It just jumped immediately to the front of my mind.
Yeah, I mean that's okay. That's fair. That's fair.
I'm rooting for Tyson. I think it's going to be fun to watch him fight. Shout outs?
What shout outs do we have? Not Jake Paul, I'll tell you that. I don't know. Just shout out to everyone listening. We're happy to be back. We took a little bit of like a break. We're back. We're excited to be back. Just thank you for bearing with us and being patient and letting us come to you live from whatever listening receptacle you have, whether it's your car, your headphones, a Bluetooth speaker. Thanks for letting us join you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Eddie, because the reason why we took a little break is because our recording did not go well last time. And I had like an audio problem. I've changed a bunch of equipment around and it wasn't quite working the way we wanted it to. And I kind of lost it. I was like, no, darn it. I can't believe the half hour wasted of all this recording time. And Eddie was like, okay, it's okay. We're going to be fine. We're going to get through this. He was my emotional support friend during my little freak out. So thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Of course. That's what we're here for. Well, for today's episode, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. It comes up a lot. It's something that I've thought about. Even, what am I at? Almost 7 years post-graduation into being a therapist, I still think about. And I think I will, like on Reddit, if I'm like on the therapist subreddit and people will talk about it, my first reaction is to be like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, calm down, whatever. But then I really think about it. I'm like, oh no, like this is like legit. And sometimes it still gets me. And I know like we're not the only profession that experiences it. I think at any time when your job and responsibility is to help other people, there's some nervousness. There's a fear that goes into it. You know, I think a lot of professions, whether it's doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, the idea of being responsible for someone else is scary. It's daunting. It really makes you think about your choices and how you react with them and how you communicate with them. I think one thing that comes to mind is for me when I first graduated was this constant idea of like, how can I help other people when I don't always feel like I can help myself? I think early on, and still sometimes, even more than sometimes, oftentimes, I'll be working with like a teen client or a family, and I'm trying to help them make improvements. I'm trying to problem solve, have some action steps, just think things through, reach their treatment goals, whatever it is. And then I'll think to myself, like, I should be listening to myself because there are some things that I can be working on. Way back when, sleep was the big one. I would always tell teens like, oh, you got to sleep more. Let's fix sleep hygiene, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd fall asleep with the TV on, or I'd fall asleep with my phone in my hand. And I was not doing a good job. I think it's also just important to acknowledge that imposter syndrome can impact anyone. New mental health professionals, old mental health professionals, all mental health professionals, all of us. It impacts all of us. And I know just some things that have been helpful for me, things like peer consult has been helpful along the way, strong support from supervisors, but also know not everyone has access to that. So I think one of our biggest hopes and the idea of today's episode was just being able to talk about it, talk where it comes from, what are some symptoms of it, how do we fight against it, and just any other information we should know. So that's the reason for today.
Nice. I like it. We're going to give you an official definition according to the National Institutes of Health. So imposter syndrome, which we may or may not abbreviate to IS, is a behavioral health phenomenon described as self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. These individuals cannot internalize their success and subsequently experience pervasive feelings of self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and or apprehension of being exposed as a fraud in their work, despite verifiable and objective evidence of their successfulness. And the terms imposter syndrome and imposter phenomenon are used interchangeably, with IP, imposter phenomenon, gaining more frequent use in recent literature.
Yeah. Fun fact.
Yeah.
While imposter syndrome is commonly researched, experienced for sure, and is a pervasive phenomenon, there is an unknown true prevalence. So we really don't know how common it is. We can throw numbers out, but there's just really not a good way of finding that out. Currently, there is no formal or widely accepted medical definition. Think like DSM-5 criteria or DSM-5 TR, text revised. There is no diagnosable criteria, but despite the lack of a formal definition, there are 6 original criteria that are identified by Clance. There's a researcher who wrote a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, that's been expanded upon since its inception and can be summarized as the following constellation of interrelated characteristics that may or may not be present in the individual with imposter syndrome. That was a mouthful. But basically, these are the things that can be identified as someone who has imposter syndrome, and we'll define all of them. The first is imposter cycle. Second is perfectionism. We have superheroism, taichophobia. I've had 2 weeks to practice this, and I'm still going to mess it up. Denial of competence, and then the made-up one, achievemophobia.
So many great words. And I saw taichophobia?
Taichophobia? I don't know.
And I have no recollection of saying this 2 weeks ago. It looked like a completely brand new word to me. I'm like, that's still not real. So number one that Eddie had mentioned is the imposter cycle, which is basically this cycle is where either the individual begins to work on something and immediately feels that they have to work harder than others, thus making them an imposter, or they procrastinate to the point where they feel they will be exposed as a fraud. In both of these scenarios, even the completion of a task is not enough to enjoy the successful feeling.
Yeah. Number 2 is perfectionism, which is perfectionism. The individual feels like being perfect is the only way to prove they're not a fraud. This can lead to things like unrealistic expectations. If you have a ton of unrealistic expectations and you don't meet them, oftentimes it'll start to really impact your self-esteem and your self-worth. So if you have this list of like, I have to do this, 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 and this, or I have to achieve this, this, and this, and you're not able to do all of it, really starts to wear down on your mental health.
Up next, we have superheroism, which is characterized by over-preparation, which then in turn poorly impacts the individual's mental health. I have somewhat of an example of this to where I used to want to be a surgeon, and on your general surgery rotation, you have to do really well. I had somewhat of a sense of imposter syndrome because I didn't really feel like I fit quite in with the surgeons. And so I over-prepared. I tried so hard, and I was staying up all night reading surgery books and trying to be prepared, look good in front of my attendings, to the point of not sleeping, to the point of feeling stressed out and sad and depressed, which I don't think I met full clinical criteria for depression. But that was some of that superheroism, trying as hard as I possibly could to fit in, to meet those expectations, to feel like I belonged.
Yeah, that's real. Thank you for sharing, dude. Next one is fear of failure, or the taichophobia, or whatever phobia. Look at the show notes. So it's the fear of failure, which is just what it sounds like. So other pieces to this include worry that by, quote, failing, that others will take this as an opportunity to shame us. That was one thing that was interesting to me. Like, as I was reading it, I didn't think about that part. Like the fear of, if I mess up, now people are going to start making fun of me or shaming me, and that's going to lead to the just more of this feeling of being an imposter.
Yeah. And that's something I do a lot too. I think if I can't express myself well, if I don't know what I'm talking about, then people are just going to turn on me and say like, well, you don't know what you're talking about, and start exposing me as a fraud and someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah, I'm realizing I've got pretty significant imposter syndrome because I got a lot of these. Up next, we have denial of competence and capability, the belief that we have no natural ability to be successful. which is kind of a
Hmm.
scary thing too.
Yeah. And the very last one, achievemophobia, or the fear of success, is the worry of doing things correctly to the point that the individual is worried that it would lead to additional work to the already pre-existing work that they have. So basically, if I keep being successful, I will get more work. If I get more work, I will work so hard to try to over prepare for all this work. I don't think I'll be able to handle all of it. And ultimately, I will feel like an imposter.
Mm-hmm. So all of these things combined can have larger impacts on our overall well-being. As we know, poor mental health can lead to poor mental health. As we know, poor mental health can lead to poor mental health. This can lead to struggles with anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Like, what do we?
Is that what I meant to put in there? Maybe we'll cut that out.
I'll cut that out.
We could cut out after our overall well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. In preparation for today, I read about 4 articles related to imposter syndrome and healthcare professionals. And every single one of them basically said the same thing, which was imposter syndrome equals bad, and it is very common. But what are we supposed to do with this information?
And I would argue that maybe a certain level of imposter syndrome is not a bad thing, because some of those seem really bad, like the fear of success, denying your own capability. But sometimes the fear of failing, the perfectionism, the superheroism can get you to work really hard and get you to know a topic really well and prepare incredibly hard for a specific task. So maybe it is somewhat of a spectrum, like most things in mental health, and a little bit of imposter syndrome, not a bad thing.
Yeah. Okay, this is going to be like a weird, and I'm not trying to flex or anything, but there was a point in time when I was in college playing football. It was after my sophomore year that I did have this semi-intense fear of not doing well enough and basically failing, not being a good enough player, that it really was one of the forefront of the ideas every time I would go to a workout or go to lifting or go to practice of I have to do these things or else I'm going to fail and I'm not going to be good enough. If I don't go to an extra workout, I'm just going to suck. All these things happened. And then the last 2 years in college ended up being my 2 better years, my best seasons overall. So I think that's a good point. Having a little bit of fear of and thinking oh, I'm gonna fail or I am an imposter, I don't belong here, actually did help me a little bit.
Wow.
Actually helped me a lot. So that is a good point.
In psychiatry, in mental health, we talk about this idea of eustress or true stress, so that a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress is a good thing. If you had no anxiety, if you didn't get stressed about anything, you probably wouldn't achieve very much in our society. Test is coming up, I'm not too worried about it. But a little bit of stress says, okay, I want to do well on that. I don't want to fail. I want to do well so I can keep going to the next objective, and can get you to motivate and get you to do well on those things. So yeah, maybe a little bit of a stress thing can be a good thing, a bit of a spectrum.
Yeah, that's good to bring up. So with all the information, what are we supposed to do? How do we make this better? Well, the National Institute of Health suggests things like self-reflection, psychotherapy, and practicing gratitude as things that you can do to help yourself. There's also a study that suggested that compassionate and well-connected supervision can serve as a way to fight against imposter syndrome. And I will take this opportunity to shout out my boy Tony. He was my very first clinical supervisor after I graduated. Huge support. He was a part-time employee for the county that I worked at. The rest of the time, he would do supervision and his own private practice stuff. And he would tell me all the time, yes, I am employed by the county, but I am here for you. I am your supervisor. Anytime I had supervision with him, I always looked forward to it because I knew I would leave feeling better. Group supervision was awesome too. Once a month with my coworkers and him, Tony's the man. I still talk to him to this day if I have questions about things. He's always willing to answer. So shout out Tony for real. Having that kind of supervision was super helpful for me early on.
Yeah, it's so nice to have someone that you trust and you look up to show you and tell you that you're doing what you should be doing, that you're where you should be. That's just a nice thing. going back to my terrible surgery rotation that I was talking about earlier, in my feedback at the end of that, they said I needed constant validation, which I don't think is me. It's
Yeah.
nice to know when you got something right, or nice to know if you're doing
Mm-hmm.
something right, just so you have that positive feedback of like, okay, I'll keep going. I'll keep doing it this way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they were just mad at millennials and angry old doctors, angry old surgeons, and wanted to take it out on their medical students. So
Yeah.
this is my time to heal from that
Boo.
bad. It was a pretty toxic. Everyone always has, or not everyone, but a lot of med students have bad horror stories about surgery rotations, and I had a pretty bad one too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, an article from the American Psychological Association has 7 tips that can help. The first 2 are learning the facts. So, learning the facts about where you should be, what you should be doing, and then also sharing your feelings, expressing some of this stuff. Getting out of your head a little bit can be an important part of processing where you are in your process.
Mm-hmm. Sharing your feelings, just putting them out there, not keeping it to yourself, is also super important. I talk to students all the time. When they come to my office, oftentimes they have gotten to their like almost breaking point of like, wow, I really need to talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them, like, if you can do this earlier in the process and we can talk before you get to this point, I think it'll go a long way in helping you. And I mean, I struggle with that part too. I know a lot of people struggle with that, of just sharing what is on their mind openly, and not just keeping it to themselves.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the mindfulness aspect of all this. I've been on a big mindfulness kick lately, where you need to understand how your brain works, be mindful of those patterns that you fall into. And if you can create an intervention at the beginning of the pattern, and instead of letting it linger on and get to the bad part where you need to talk to someone, that's a really good way to try and help control your feelings and emotions.
Yeah. So the next one is celebrate your success. So like just celebrate it, be happy about it, share it with people, be open, and just take in the success. But I do have to share this. Back in the day, I don't know if you ever looked at this, Justin. It is like 20. Damn, this might actually be a long time ago. This might have been like 2015, 2014, 2016-ish. DJ Khaled would post on his Snapchat story all the time. And like, to me, this was like, I had to watch it because I just enjoyed it. And he would do the same thing every day. He'd walk into the kitchen in the morning. He'd see his private chef. Like, chef, what's for breakfast? And then the chef would be like, oh, we got some egg whites, some turkey sausage, some fruit, and some water. He's like, yeah, bless up, blah, 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 turkey bacon, turkey sausage, egg whites. And then because at the same time he had like, he probably still does, had to deal with Ciroc, the alcohol, he would have a bottle of apple Ciroc on the table, and then he would include, I don't think he'd have it with his breakfast, but he would include it with his breakfast, and he would say, an apple Ciroc, celebrate success. So it just reminded me of like, he would celebrate every morning that he had apple Ciroc with him. So if anything, that should just remind us we can celebrate the little things in life.
I like that. You know, a good breakfast, you should celebrate that success.
Yeah.
If you got a roof over your head, hey, even if you don't have a roof over your head, you got some things to celebrate. Some things you've done well in life.
Yeah.
Up next, we have
last couple things.
Oh, yeah. Up next, we have letting go of perfectionism, which can be a really hard thing because I feel like our society really values perfectionism and wants people to be perfectionistic in a lot of ways, but it can get really toxic and really bog you down. And then next one, we have cultivating self-compassion, which is another thing I feel like we struggle with in our society. We feel like we need to sacrifice ourselves for our business, sacrifice ourselves for our kids, sacrifice ourselves for our relationships. But it's important to have compassion for yourself and understand that you have needs and you need to take care of yourself too.
Mm-hmm. Back real quick to the perfectionism part, you talked about like society's role in perfectionism. I think society also like puts a lot of stock into like results and like getting like accomplishments. So it feels like if we're not doing things or if we're not accomplishing things, we're not doing enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cultural piece that we struggle with. So just a thought. one of the last couple of things that the APA talks about as far as a tip for fighting against imposter syndrome, sharing your failures and making it normal to talk about those things and to understand that like mess ups, failures happen, mistakes happen. Being able to own up to them and share about them is really important in the healing process. And kind of along similar lines is just accepting what's going on. It's the first part of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Just being able to accept what is, be mindful of the present moment, see what's in front of us, take it all in, accept it, and figure out ways to move forward from it.
Yeah, even just knowing what it is, what the definition is, how many people struggle with it is all important things. I remember not really even hearing about imposter syndrome until medical school. And then a lot of the people in my medical school were like, yeah, that's me. I feel like maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I don't work well enough here. So yeah, just being aware of it so that we can understand how it's impacting us can help us get through it and work through it too. Eddie, I know I talked a little bit about myself, but have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think one time that came to mind was actually early on with the podcast back in like 2019, early 2020, before COVID, where just this idea of like, why would anyone even want to listen to what I'm talking about? Like, am I just going to sound dumb? Do I even know what I'm talking about? And it wasn't really until an early episode into the series of like, we talked about something and I said something of like, in my expert opinion. And I was like, well, I don't know about expert. And then you like stop and they're like, no, you are an expert. Like we both are experts. Like we do this for our job. It's like, fuck, that's a good point. We do this. This is what we do. Like this is okay to have our own personal, professional opinion. And that really helped a lot. I think maybe sometimes still today with work, being one of the only licensed therapists in the whole school district and like being called upon as an expert in a lot of cases and a lot of things going on. Sometimes I'll think to myself like, fuck, do I really know what's happening? Do I really like understand what's going on? But in those moments, it just reminds me to like take a step back. I don't have to just give a singular answer to whatever is happening. I can take all the information in, and with the skill set I've developed of like taking in individual situations, looking at all the pieces, I can come up with something from there and we can figure it out as we go. But I think those are two that stick out for sure early on in the podcast and then still now to this day, but also being reminded of like, I do have the skill set to problem solve even in like the middle of crisis situations. I do still have that skill set.
And I think it's also important to realize that even as an expert, you don't have to know everything. I think it's really important because I think a lot of experts or a lot of professionals, if they're faced with a question where they can either like, if they don't know the question or don't know the answer, they can either BS their way out of it or just say, hey, I don't know, but I'm going to look into it and find out. I feel like a lot of people just BS their way through it. And like, that's it's a very common thing that happens every day in the United States. Yeah. So it's okay. And it shows humility to say, I don't know. But that's a great question, and I'm going to try and find out.
Yeah. Well, then it's my turn to ask you a question. If you had a colleague, you had somebody that was having a hard time or they were struggling with imposter syndrome, how would you talk to them?
I would say the same thing that my med school told me when I first got into medical school. Yeah, they taught us about imposter syndrome, and then they reinforced the message of, if you are here, then you deserve to be here. Like you made it. We want you here. We don't want you to fail out. We want to see you successful. So you deserve to be here. So reinforcing some of that positive self-talk. And I know in the past we've talked about squashing the gnats of negative automatic thoughts. And so it's okay to have those thoughts. I always say it's okay to have any thought, but it's not okay to believe all of them. Sometimes you have to fight some of those thoughts. You have to push back and say, like, do I really deserve to be here? Am I an imposter? You say, no, I fought hard to be here. I deserve to be here. I'm smart enough. I can do this.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
I also, instead of gnat, I say
ants.
But same thing. Automatically get that. I mean, I think with talking with a colleague is reminding them that if the roles were reversed and they were talking to someone that they felt was struggling with imposter syndrome, most likely they'd be pretty compassionate, pretty supportive, and have some empathy for that person. So I would just challenge them to have some empathy for themselves, to remind themselves that same thing, like you would be 100% supportive of me if I was struggling. I want you to try to have that same support for yourself.
Cool. I like that. Now, I
Yeah.
did meet one person in my career where we were talking about imposter syndrome, and she was like, I just never really got imposter syndrome. Never really felt that way. And she was awesome. She was a great doctor, incredibly competent and confident. So I just thought that was so funny. It seems like almost everyone I meet has some level of imposter syndrome, but not. Shout out Dr. Hicker, because she was a very good mentor. Someone I really looked up to, and just like I loved hearing the fact that she's like, nope, never felt it, never.
Not me, couldn't be me.
Have you ever met anyone that you like didn't have any imposter syndrome? Or
I don't think so. At least not like outwardly.
I know, right? It's kind of rare.
Not like that. Yeah, everyone's got a little bit of like not entirely sure what to do, but I guess not everybody. Most people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some pop culture, some influences, some people, some famous people who have come out and also said that they struggle with imposter syndrome. Number one is Bella Hadid. Now, I only really know her as Justin Bieber's wife's friend. She's also a model. Does she do other stuff?
I think she was on a TV show. God, Kevin's going to give me shit for this. There was like a Netflix show. I'm pretty sure she was on it. Hold on. Bella Hadid Netflix show. Here we go. I think it was Next in Fashion. Next in Fashion. There we go. She was like a host on it. I'm pretty sure it was her. Shit, it was either her or her sister, Gigi. I don't know. Either way. Very famous. That's
one of the Hadids.
Yep.
Up next, we have Lupita Nyong'o, the female actress who has been in a lot of excellent movies, including Star Wars. I'm blanking. What other movies is she in, Ed? Black Panther.
This Is Us. Yep. Or Us. Yeah. Not This Is Us. This Is Us is the TV show.
Those are very different media.
Us, the Jordan Peele film. Very good movie. Kind of confusing because it was too intellectual for me, but it was good.
Yeah.
Next is Emma Watson, who you all know as Hermione from the Harry Potter series. That one was surprising to me because it's like, as I've like read the books, she seems like the only person who could be Hermione. So it's like it's interesting to me that she. I think in the article she mentioned feeling like she didn't fully fit in with everybody, even though I had a hard time imagining that.
Crazy. Up next, we have Michelle Obama, which, this one was super surprising because what hasn't she done? She's had a super successful career. But even someone on top of the world like that can feel imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Wolfgang Puck, who's the famous celebrity chef who has a restaurant probably on every block in Las Vegas.
One of the most successful chefs. Ellie Goulding, the British singer, pop star, who I actually love her music. And that Helicon album that she had in the early 2000s with Lights, such a good album. I think it was largely inspired by her breakup with Calvin Harris. So good breakup album. Calvin broke so many hearts, inspired a lot of good music.
And the last one on our list is Tom Hanks, the very successful Tom Hanks. He doesn't need, just like everybody else on the list, they don't need too much of an introduction. But Tom Hanks talked about having a hard time with success and feeling like it was warranted and like it was deserving for him.
Yeah. Who's the biggest surprise to you on this list?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm looking at it. I don't know. I think the good thing is when we do look up lists like this of like people who have dealt with whatever our topic is for the episode, I don't get as surprised anymore because I think a lot of people are a lot more open about their struggles, which I think is cool. So I think that makes it a little easier. But if I just took a peek at it, like real quick, maybe Emma Watson, that was the one, especially because she said she felt like she didn't belong with the rest of like in the series. Like that just felt so like wrong.
Yeah,
I can't imagine anyone else doing Hermione's role justice. So yeah, maybe that one.
absolutely. For me, Tom Hanks, like top of the
Yeah.
world, best actor, Academy Award. Like he's done everything. He's been in everything. You can't really be a bigger actor than Tom Hanks, and even he struggles with imposter syndrome. So I'd say if we have
Yeah.
one take-home message, or at least my take-home message for today, is that imposter syndrome is an incredibly real thing. And I'm sure a lot of you out there listening have thought about it, have struggled with it, feel like maybe you're not quite good enough, that you don't deserve to be where you are. But please understand that if you're there, you deserve to be there, and you worked hard to get there. And these things aren't mistakes, that this is a really common phenomenon. And even some of the most successful people in the world feel that way too.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't have said it better myself. So we're going to end with that. Thank you, my friend. Thank you all for listening. Like always, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever other streaming app you use. Feel free to follow us, like, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a 5-star review and a comment if you'd like. On Spotify, you can do the same exact thing. On social media, you can find us at Millennial MHC on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can visit us at millennialmhc.com to find links to the show, any blog posts we've made, and just you can see our pretty faces. So feel free to visit it. It's a nice website. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all the time. Thank you. And as always, take care of y'all mentals.